Okay, so one thing that you need to realize about inverse functions is that inverses of functions are not always functions. So for example, if I have y equals x squared and it is reflected over x equals y, then I have this function right here and it doesn't pass the vertical line test. Okay, so this is a function, this is not a function. Of course, over here we have the cube root of x, looks like this, and x cubed, so they're inverses of each other, looks like this. So it's reflected over x equals y, or y equals x, and in this case, they are both functions because they both pass the vertical line test. So finding the inverse of a quadratic function. So any line you have, the inverse will be a line, and that's always, unless it's straight up and down, unless it's undefined, okay, they will both be functions. Okay, but this says find the inverse of f of x equals x squared, where x is greater than or equal to 0, then graph the function and its inverse. So what they want to know, first of all, we can find the inverse. I'm trying to remember how okay. So we have y equals x squared, and we want to reverse these. So we have x equals y squared. And if we take the square root of both, we get y equals plus or minus the square root of x. Well, since we're only taking values of x greater than 0, this can only be positive. All right? So here's a graph. Here we have our x squared where it's only positive, okay? And then we have this line right here where they're also only positive. So this is what that would look like. Okay, so the horizontal line test, I was just talking about the vertical line test. So it makes sense that if we're taking the inverse, that if for a regular function it has to pass the vertical line test to be a function, that if the inverse doesn't pass the horizontal line test, then it's not a function. Okay, so reading this, it says the inverse of a function f is also a function if and only if no horizontal line, did I just say that? Horizontal line intersects the graph of f more than once. So the inverse is a function. The inverse of this is not a function because it doesn't pass the horizontal line test. Okay, so consider the function f of x equals 2x cubed plus 1. Determine whether the inverse of f is a function and then find the inverse. So what I would do on these problems is go to Desmos, okay? That's what I would do first. Go to Desmos. Graph this, or if you have a graphing calculator, put it in your calculator, but you need to graph it first and see if it passes the horizontal line test. And if it does, then the inverse is a function. Okay, so for example, here is 2x cubed plus 1. And if I put a horizontal line through all of this, I guess it's possible for it not to pass right here, but I really think it does. So I believe it is a function. Okay, so let's flip-flop these. We've got x equals 2y cubed plus 1. Subtract 1 from both sides. I have x minus 1 equals 2y cubed divided by 2. So now I have y cubed equals x minus 1 over 2. And now I need to take the cube root of both sides. So I have y equals the cube root of x minus 1 over 2. All right. Here's another one. Okay, that was finding the inverse of a cubic function, finding the inverse of a radical. Okay, so first of all, again, determine whether the inverse of f is a function. So we would graph it first, okay, and then find the inverse. So here is the graph. Does it pass the horizontal line test? It does. So the function the inverse would be a function. So if I take the inverse of this right here, I'm going to flip-flop. So I have x equals 2 times the square root of y minus 3. And I'm solving for y. So x minus 2 equals the square root of y minus 3. I'm going to square both sides. So I have x squared over 4 equals y minus 3. And I'm going to add 3 to both sides. So y equals x squared over 4 plus 3. And that is the inverse function there. All right, so I want you to go ahead and try these, so you can pause your video now. All right, so finding the inverse, we're just flip-flopping, right? So we have x equals negative y squared. And x is less than or equal to 0. So let's flip-flop these. We're going to multiply both sides by a negative. So I have y squared. And now I take the square root of both. And remember, x is negative. So this is a negative number, and I'm putting a negative in front of it. Okay, so this is actually a positive number. So y equals plus or minus the square root of negative x. I know that's really weird, but remember, x is negative. Okay, let me let me double check that one, because that's a little weird. Okay, all right, so here we have f of x equals negative x cubed plus 4. So I'm going to flip-flop again. X equals negative y cubed plus 4. Subtract 4 from both sides. I'm going to multiply both sides by a negative 1. So I have negative x plus 4 equals y cubed. Now I'm going to take the cube root of both of these. So y equals the cube root of negative x plus 4. And finally, x equals the square root of y plus 2. I square both sides. Okay, subtract 2 from both sides, and I get y equals x squared minus 2. All right, I have just a little bit more, I think, and so that will be on the next video.